really what I want to talk about is about this book, this report that we released earlier in the year, and hopefully you've all read it. If not, download it from the UK Plant Science website and peruse it. So really, what I want to talk about today is not so much, I think we've heard so nicely from Tim Benton and from Peter Gregory and others about how important plant science is, and I think to go through that would just be repeating what we would all agree with. So I see little point to that. So really what I want to do is just talk about what the people who responded to this report were telling us, what needed to be done, and the issues that were raised. So first of all, I guess a little bit of history. Tim showed perfectly what happened when there was a coordinated investment in crop science in the UK following World War II and through the 1980s. Yeah, an explosion in yield and progress in productivity in every way. And I think Peter Gregory also hinted at a key component of that, and that was it was an integrated approach. So you would have geneticists, you would have people who understood plant breeding, you would also have physiologists, you'd have pathologists who would test these things, you'd have statisticians and people who modelled the crop densities and the shapes of the plants and all that sort of thing, and all of that went together to produce the yields that we see today. Yeah? And so that it was just amazingly successful. And then came the 1980s, the 2000s, which I term the year of food complacency, where government ministers said it doesn't matter really because we can buy this stuff if we need it. And I think that was a mentality that crept in. And as a consequence of that, things have been dismantled in our community. I mean, I think we can all go back to think of things that were done that are remarkable. I mean, I guess most fruit trees, I'm not a fruit breeder, but a lot of fruit trees that we grow are still grown on East Malling dwarfing rootstocks. So that's coming out of government research. We're all aware of all the wonderful Amaris varieties that came from the PBI. Aberystwyth's site there, whatever its current name is, IBES and West Plant Breeding Station as I remember it, as producing forage grasses and clover mixtures that revolutionised our grassland production across the whole country. And I guess to me, I just remember one guy who was at Wellesbourne when I arrived in '97. So he was, I hope, if people know him, he would not be offended if I say he was of the old school. And there's a guy called Brian Smith who was breeding hybrid leeks at the time. Those hybrid leeks went out, and they're used globally today. And but he had a hard time, right? Because his review process were asking him, I guess, where's your science publications? And as a consequence of that, we've lost these skills. Okay, and then to 2000 today, we now have the words that say food security is important. And it's a priority to us all. I guess I'm not convinced we've seen the investment change as a consequence of those words. And I think that's what came through from the report. And we've moved on from the 1980s and before. The tools, some of the things you've heard about already are just phenomenal of what we could do today. But it isn't going to happen without the right structures in place for it to happen. So, I don't know whether you can see this very clearly, but this is a picture of the current funding status. And funding was a thing, not unsurprisingly, that was gathered up a great deal of the time. So this is a sort of a snapshot of about 2011-2012 funding to plant science as we could determine it. The largest by far is BBSRC, and this represents really our major funding council, and almost, as you can see, our only funding council that is funding in any substantive way. The only other major contributions actually are from the Gatsby Charity Foundation. So this is 23, this is a construction phase. It's about an annual spend of 12 to 13 million from Gatsby. It's a construction phase of the Cambridge labs that changed that picture. And actually the AHD, the levy boards represented by the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board. And if you look there, it's about 11.5 million come in from that. But that's the major Those are the major contributions. The one that's really quite startling, if I can find it, is DEFRA, coming in at 1.3 million. Now, when I started in 97 at Wellesbourne, the horticulture DEFRA budget alone was 10 million. And this is total plant science spend. Okay, and so that's a huge hole that's opened up in our funding agencies. Okay, I can take this a bit further, and we can drill down into, say, the BBC spend to give you some picture. It's not a comment, this is just what is actually happening. So, of that 75 million, about 50 million goes to the research institutes. 25 million through current and 25 million through other funding. So that leaves 25 million for response mode grants. So that's about 50 grants a year to fund the whole of plant science in the UK. And about 30 to 35 of those go to the HE higher educations, to the universities. So the university sector of plant science is supported by 30 to 35 response mode grants a year. And the total spend in terms of government spend on science is about 4%. So that's the climate we're currently in. You can talk about how wonderfully successful we are. So, and it's true, right? Because of the way the investment has been over the last 20 years, it's focused mostly on fundamental science. And a consequence of that, if you look at our output in terms of rating of our publication output, we're second only to the United States. But my feeling is that's not going to last. And this is the reason here. This is our flatlining in publications, or a slight decline. I'm sure the statisticians in the audience wouldn't let me allow to say that. But it's not going anywhere, whereas this is our competition from the newly developing countries in terms of total number of publications. Okay, it's total number, I know, but the message is clear, and there's some very, very good science being done in China and Brazil and places too. And in the US, even with what we're told is really poor conditions there, their number of publications is rising. So I guess we're dealing a shift. If we now, so the key thing that came across then was that if people we need to invest in crop science and in developing crop products and things like that. And I don't think there's anyone in the audience would disagree with that. But what they also came through from the community was this mustn't be done at the cost of fundamental science, because I think Lars was showing you beautifully how fundamental science feeds through to crop analysis and structure production. So somehow we have to play some sort of game here of increasing the input into crop science while maintaining the output of the fundamental science. And I guess that's the problem, right? So do we rob Peter to pay Paul? And within a limited funding of limited amount of government money for funding our research, are we going to do anything? Are we going to say maybe focus on only one crop, because actually that's the only way you can do this? I mean, these are sort of questions that are going to have to be asked if you're limiting within a particular pot of resources. This 4% funding level is actually quite interesting. It's actually been flat since the 1970s. So why is it we've lost a lot of people from our community in that time, and a lot of resource? So a significant number goes to plant agencies, 35 grants. To us, I think this just doesn't add up, and that's why we're calling for a doubling of research funding for plant science. If you're going to maintain the fundamental brilliance of this country, and actually then restructure the whole of the pipeline to get crop outputs and engaging with industry, it's going to be a challenge that requires significant more resources, wherever that comes from. Okay, so the two calls were more money. I guess every community says that, but I think we have a persuasive case of the reasons why that is the case here. And secondly, it's a stability of funding. You can't do plant science on a turnaround of going to the lab and do the experiment today and the result tomorrow. It's long-term science. It takes a structured approach, and it takes the inputs of so many different people to make a product. Okay, so the other thing that came through clearly was, again, something that often comes up in this effective translation of plant science. So increased public-private sector partnerships were asked for. Knowledge transfer in general was seen as the biggest weakness in the UK research strategy. We need to work out how to use basic research to translation and beneficial technologies and outcomes more. As it says here, plant science clearly represented in knowledge exchange programs, mechanisms to support research into practice is simple, stable, and readily accessible. So we're not chopping and changing the whole time. The community gets to know what the approach is over a period of time. Again, we call for stability. The next thing I think that people were really quite worked up about, and it's really great to see 6 very talented young people before this session, is inspiring a new generation of plant scientists. I think the people that were there before, and the old school, if you like, the people that were coming out of the 1970s, 80s, are more or less gone from the system now. And what were the young bucks of the 1980s when molecular biology came along are also now getting old, like me. And there is quite a bubble within our community that's in this 50 to 60-year-old category as a consequence of the investment that went in to molecular biology. The success of plant molecular biology, frankly, boomed a whole new generation of research with fantastic stuff. But now we're getting old, and it is really important that new generation are inspired to do that. I think every review that goes on comes up with this, there's not enough skills, okay? And it's actually quite a hard sell because it's probably true across many parts of our community, not only our community but others. But in ours, 5 areas were highlighted, and they're listed here as key areas that are seen to be under-resourced in terms of producing skills for industry. And that certainly, I think, is the case. And here it's also saying that HE, higher education, tends to lack crop science skills because of the fall-off in people going into university to do plant and crop science. Then the teaching levels have impacted down there. So I guess, how do we inspire young minds into plant science? And I guess a lot of people in this room, okay, those of us in our 50s, it's actually almost like a rerun of those days today to me. You know, well, where's the fuel coming from? There's not enough food in the world. There's too many people. Is almost what I believed when I started out to do this work, and inspired me to go into plant science because I wanted to do something good. And I think that is a very inspiring call to young people, and I think it's something we should encourage to be out there in getting people to be motivated to do plant science. And I think if you do that, we will get a very positive response. So teaching in schools, teach the value and relevance of plant science, needs inspirational teaching methods without any doubt, and I think make the content relevant to benefit of humankind, and then you'll see the response. In higher education, if those of us who are in biological sciences departments, I think if I say we need to fight the dominant medical culture, where people will know what I'm talking about, and we need to have confidence to integrate plant science in biological sciences degrees. And again, when bright students are exposed to plant science, you get very positive responses. And I think a lot of the practical skills-based things could be addressed by targeted MSc courses, professional development courses, in terms of getting people trained in there. Okay, so education training needs must meet the needs of employers was a big message from the report. And education, industry and technology sectors, and there's a whole range of things that were proposed that would make a better interaction with industry and with employees. Certainly, my experience at Warwick is that we have an MSc in modern agronomy, and those students are being picked up by the industry very quickly. And so there is a demand out there for trained people in this area. And finally, people were saying regulatory frameworks were a key barrier to the development of our technologies. This is through EU regulation and GM. Scientists and farmers all need these tools available to themselves. We're losing jobs. This is a high anthocyanin tomato that's it's a JI, I believe this is developed, and if it's not being produced in this country but in Canada, and that's just a loss, silly. The blight-resistant potatoes from Jonathan Jones' group at Sainsbury Lab could just be used, would make a huge difference to the use of fungicides in the fields, but we can't, and this is just a real shame. So the request was for regulatory frameworks, evidence, risk-based, transparent, encouraging of innovation. And we all know what climate change we've got to adapt to, and we need the tools available to ourselves. So in summary, there were the 6 conclusions and recommendations from the report. Increased investment in plant science is urgently needed. Stability of funding was seen as key. And effective merge these with an effective translation of the plant science into applications is vital. 2 sections on inspiration, on education. 1, inspiring a new generation of crop scientists, plant scientists, and educating and training must meet the needs of employers. And finally, the regulatory frameworks that need to be developed for this to all be implemented. So kind of those are the 6 areas that the report concluded were important for us to invest in and to take forward. So the concept of today really is to get a discussion going with the community about what should be done, to encourage people to get involved with that discussion, not only now, but ongoing in the next 6 or 7 months. And so what we're proposing is to set up 5 working groups. I think you can see those map onto the outcomes of the report. Hopefully you've all had an email from Mimi asking if you want to take part in that, in these working parties. And real engagement in this now, going forward, will be very, very important. And if you want to get in touch with Mimi or us on the website, those are the communications. Okay, thank you very much.